Welcome folks, I'm Gary Ryan here from Organisations That Matter. It's my absolute pleasure to be bringing to you Creating Winning Resumes, an employer's perspective, as we interview Pauline Bennett, who is the Manager of Organisation Development from the City of Whitehorse. So just quickly, Pauline, a quick hello to you.
Hello, Gary.
Welcome aboard and thanks for giving up your precious time to have a chat with us today.
Thank you.
I'll just do a little bit of a brief introduction to our audience so they know what's going on. I'm aware that for some of them today is the first time that they're experiencing a webinar. So just briefly, Organisations That Matter is the organisation that I have created, and in simple terms, what I do is I work with people who are interested in moving beyond being good. So whether that be at an individual level, at a team level, a departmental level, or in fact at an organisational level. So I have a whole range of tools and strategies that I use to help folk move beyond being good, because lots of people are good, lots of teams are good, lots of organisations are good, but it's about being better than that folk are generally very interested in, and that's the space that I work in. And clearly getting yourself jobs and resumes is clearly part of moving beyond being good, and that's why you've bothered to give up your time to be with us here today. So the time that we're going to spend together, we'll have a little bit of time going through the introduction as I'm doing right now. We'll spend the vast majority of our time, of our total of 40 minutes, interviewing Pauline and finding out her perspective from a very experienced person's point of view on resumes and the sorts of lessons and things and tips and tools that you can use. We'll also have an opportunity at the end to ask any questions that haven't been addressed, so that will be a chance for you to open up your microphones and or type your questions in, and then we'll just spend a few minutes wrapping up at the end. As we go through this webinar, you'll notice that you do have a little toolbar in the top right-hand corner of your screen. If you do have a question when we get to the question segment later on in the session, you can raise your hand and you can, we'll be able to give you an opportunity to have you ask a question live to Pauline. I encourage you to have some form of note-taking, whether it be the traditional notepad on pen or an iPad or whatever format, or it's other tablets that you might be using to take notes as we go through. As I said, we are recording this webinar, and that recording will be posted on the OTM Academy, which is otmacademy.com. So if you want to access the recording of this webinar, you will need to be a member of the OTM Academy. That is a free community that I operate, so it doesn't cost you anything to join there. But if you do want to access the webinar recording, you will need to be a member of there. All right, just covering off what we'll be talking about with Pauline, who again is the Manager of Organisation Development at the City of Whitehorse. We'll be looking at why bother crafting your resume in the first place, and what do recruiters look for in resumes. Does yours meet the health check? So we'll find out what Pauline means by that. And will your resume clinch that interview, meaning get you in to have an interview, which is what the purpose of a resume is, and any other considerations, and clearly what you also need to do right now as a result of what you are learning from Pauline. So Pauline, just to get started, if you want to just have a quick chat a little bit about the City of Whitehorse and your role and your time in government. Yeah, what can you tell us about yourself in that context, please?
Thanks, Gary. I'm the Manager of Organisation Development at the City of Whitehorse, and in that portfolio I look after learning and development, human resources, and occupational health and safety and work cover. We have a workforce of about 1,200 people, so it's quite a big portfolio, and we also manage another 500 or 600 volunteers, and as people would be aware, volunteers are becoming more and more treated like employees in terms of what we need to do for them. So it's quite a big portfolio, and I've been at Whitehorse for 6 years, just ticked over 6 years, and before that I've been in a couple of other councils, a statutory authority for a long time, and I ran my own consulting business for a while too when my children were quite young. So had a variety of experience in both the public and private sector.
You've definitely been very busy, and with 1,200 staff across a wide variety of roles, as you've said, Pauline, I'm sure you've seen many recruitment process and certainly overseen them for those different roles. And I suppose what we're here to hear about today is some of the themes and patterns that you've learned as a result of that experience over time.
Yes, yes. And I should mention that Whitehorse in the local government sector is considered quite highly as an innovative council. We were one of the first councils in Australia to undertake workforce planning. We did that about 6 years ago now, and we're a benchmark that's used throughout the sector in Australia for workforce planning. We also have some innovative industrial relations initiatives at Whitehorse, including family violence leave, a sick leave bank, and we're also leading in leadership development, where we focus on action learning programs. So Whitehorse has got quite a good reputation in the sector for innovative organisation development practice.
Which is exactly, Pauline, why we've got you here today. Now, just to start us off, you used the term crafting your resume, and I'm interested. What does that term crafting your resume mean?
Well, we suggest that people should craft their resumes because as a recruiter, and I don't think I'm alone in this, we may only spend between 15 and 30 seconds, which is about 5 minutes less than what we've just spent in the opening segment of this seminar, to read a resume. So if you're going to make an impression in that 15 to 30 seconds that the recruiter reads your resume, you need to hit the mark with the key selection criteria and provide a window to yourself, to the recruiter, so that they know what you want to achieve in your career, but also where you've been and how you fit in with the role that they're recruiting for.
So, given it's a crafting, if I think back to the old folk who are craftspeople in historical terms, crafting is something that just doesn't happen the first time you do it. So I'm sort of hearing you also suggest that if you're crafting your resume, it's an ongoing process. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My resume that I use that I always have ready, because you never know when a headhunter's going to ring you, I look at probably twice a year, and I would recommend that people do that. Just sit down, add in their most recent experience, but also when you are applying for a role, that your stock standard resume is not what you submit. You go through your resume with the key selection criteria sitting next to you, and you craft that resume to fit. I'm not saying that you should embellish the truth, but that your experience fits the key selection criteria that is required for that role. For example, you may have a list of things, if you're an experienced person, that you've achieved throughout your career. If the number one key selection criteria is one of the things in that list, you would put that thing up at the top of the list in your resume. So you're crafting your resume to fit the key selection criteria for that role.
Yes, so there's really two levels to crafting. It's the ongoing factor of crafting your resume so that it's constantly up to date. As you said, yes. you never know when a headhunter is going to contact you. In fact, I know a general manager from the state of South Australia who recently, through LinkedIn, was headhunted by Apple Australia for a job through doing LinkedIn searches. And I know in this case, her name's Ali, that Ali had a crafted resume ready to go. Even though she'd been working for the organisation for over 8 years, she had an up-to-date resume. So that's one level of crafting you've just said, Pauline. But the second level is, if you are going for a job, is crafting your resume against the selection criteria. And so many folk that I'm aware of, they don't do that second bit. They just have a resume and then they just go and send it in. Every single job, it's the same resume, and it's not really crafting it in accordance to the selection criteria. Now that takes work, doesn't it, to craft your resume at that second level?
Absolutely, Gary. Recently I interviewed or selected some candidates for my team, and so I read 80 resumes, and I had a couple that actually had the heading on their resume for any job.
Oh,
Now,
no.
when a recruiter reads that, you're not going to seriously consider that person as wanting to work in your organisation.
You know, and this is what people don't realise, and I hope folk are taking some really decent notes here, because it does take work, and if you don't do that work, what you're doing is actually doing a lot of work that's not going to get a result, because you mentioned at the start, Pauline, that folk are looking at resumes and spending 15 to 30 seconds. If they can spend less than that because of headings like the one you've just suggested, I suggest recruiters, being brutally honest, that's what they do. It might only take 2 seconds.
Well, some of the roles that we recruit for here at Whitehorse, we might get 300 or 400
Yes.
applications and for one role, and in that instance, you are very ruthless as you go through the resumes, and yes, 30 seconds will see you considered and potentially rejected in that short amount of time.
Yeah, so I know a number of the folk in the pre-webinar questions asked what's a no-no, and you've just shared a classic no-no of putting in your heading open for any job. It's just not specific enough, folks. So we're talking through some of the things quite clearly now that what recruiters look for, Pauline. And I'd just like you to talk through your quote here from Sarah Michael from news.com.au.
Yes, this is a classic comment that I often read in resumes, and LinkedIn recently did a survey of all the resumes on their web base, and they found that these words were all the words that are primarily used in resumes. So if you're reading a resume that includes these sorts of words, you're in the race with thousands of other people. You're not differentiating yourself, and yes, you're not doing the best possible job that you can do for yourself. You've put up on the screen now the 10 top words for Australia, and creative is number one. And look, when I read this article, I was guilty of it myself, and I did go back and review my resume and thought, I'm probably using some of these buzzwords that may or may not mean very much, and they mean even less when everybody else is using them.
So I'm sure some of our audience are keen on, so what does that mean in terms of the words that you should use? And if I've heard you correctly, really the words that you should use should be relative to the selection criteria. Am I accurate in that?
Absolutely. Reflect back the words that are used in the key selection criteria, and use words that are verifiable. That's a big thing that we look for, recruiters look for, that you can actually say something that is indicating that you have that experience. It's a verifiable thing. Either you're verifying it in what you say, or you know that your referees would be able to verify it if they were ever contacted.
So in the context of a resume, verifying it would be when you make a statement and then the achievements that you've got that would therefore verify that statement. Is that how that would be reflected in a resume?
Yes. So you could say something like good at customer service, which is not really verifiable, but you could alternatively say something like experienced in customer service obtained by working in David Jones for the last 5 years as a customer service representative. So that's a verifiable statement.
And if you've been part of an award-winning customer service team, you would clearly put that in as well. So won a state-level award through the Customer Service Institute of Australia as an example. So that gives some...
Absolutely.
Yes, and those sorts of, I've been aware, Pauline, over time of folk that have won awards like that, and it doesn't end up in their resume anywhere. And you think, God, this is great evidence to support that. And they say, oh, yeah, but the organisation won it. I say, well, were you part of the organisation? They said, yes. And I say, well, then clearly you were part of winning that award. Then it's evidence that supports that.
That's right.
That award's real. People can actually go and look that up. It's interesting too that LinkedIn itself also has shared some data on the top overused buzzwords in LinkedIn profiles. Now, this report that folk can see on the screen now is from around the world, but the ones in blue, words like creative again, are popping up there. We've got motivated, multinational, responsible, analytical, specialised, effective and experimental, which they do vary around the globe, and I am aware that we've got some folk here from online with us from Canada, the USA and also Indonesia, as well as all parts of Australia at the moment, Pauline. So we've got quite a broad audience in attendance today. And so folk, if they haven't seen that source, that LinkedIn report, you've got it up there on the screen for you to learn about what are the words that you shouldn't be doing. And really the message that we've heard from Pauline so far is look at the words that folk are using in their selection criteria, share them back in terms of what you've got in your resume, and then making sure that you reflect those words again in your resume and then verify them. I'm interested, based on the last two sets of words that we've seen, so we might just go back to the Australian ones. I'd like to just get our audience to see if you have these words. I'm going to get you to do a quick poll. If you've got these words in your resume currently and or in your LinkedIn profile. So if you wouldn't mind just quickly clicking your button on yes, no or unsure. We're getting the votes coming through. We've got 10 more seconds where I will close this poll, and we'll look at what the results are. We've got 5 more seconds. Give you a chance to click yes, no or unsure. Okay, we'll just close that poll off. And what the results are showing, so I'll just share those results with you, is that 82% of our audience, Pauline, have said that yes, those words are currently in their resume or LinkedIn profile. 18% have said they're unsure. So when we get to the last part of our interview today in terms of what people need to do, I think there should be a note that folk are saying is go over my resume and
Yes.
get rid of those words. Any other comments you've got on those poll results, Pauline?
No, it doesn't surprise me, and as an experienced recruiter, we see them all the time, and if you want to stand out from other people with your resume, you really do need to spend some time crafting your resume so that it doesn't look like everybody else's.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll now just go and close that poll off in terms of hiding it there. Fascinating results there, folks, and thank you for very quickly responding for us. So we've just done our little vault. So in terms of the health check of a resume, we've got some points up there for us to help. And people have been asking lots of questions, Pauline, about the length of a resume, the type, the fonts and all of those sorts of things. And what can you tell us about that, please?
Okay, I will just differentiate between resume and CV before I start.
Yes.
Because some people get mixed up with that. A resume, from my point of view, is something that's no more than 4 pages. Mine is 3 pages with a cover letter, and that covers 35 years' experience. So it can be done. Whereas the curriculum vitae or a CV is usually a much longer document. It's something that we don't use very much in local government, but it is used a lot in academia, particularly where they're looking for your publication record. So a CV is a longer document of all your experience, and it usually includes the publications that you've either contributed to or have written yourself. So that's the difference between those two.
So on that point, then, folks should be very clear. If it does say CV, they need to check. Do they mean that longer document? They need to. They probably need to assume to start with that is the longer version. As you say, it is
Yes.
relative and specific, usually to an academic type role. But most often they'll be asked to send in their resume. But if the word curriculum vitae or CV is used, they probably need to double check the exact meaning by whoever's put that advertisement out there. Okay. All right, that's a really good point, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So my resume is about 3 pages long, and that's my standard template resume, if you like.
Yes.
And then that's what I use to craft it for each job application that you go for. I think note form or dot point form is far better than written word. I remember helping a comms expert once with their resume, and she'd spent a whole week crafting an 8-page resume into beautiful prose. And when I told her that people looked at your resume for no more than about 30 seconds, she was devastated. She'd spent so much time on it. But I encouraged her to put all of her beautiful prose into dot points, and she did get the job, which was good. But it was quite agonising for her as a comms expert.
And clearly, in doing that, we don't reduce ourselves to 6-point fonts so we can squeeze everything from 10 pages into 3. Is that right?
No. I'll go into the font in what it actually looks like in a bit more detail later on. But but just overall, your resume, 3 to 4 pages max, dot points. Try and get one idea or a claim to a line if possible, so it doesn't go over more than one line. It's amazing, even with comms experts, how many spelling errors or typos we come across. And if you're applying for a job that has excellent written communication skills as one of the key selection criteria, and you've got spelling errors or typos in your resume, you're not going to get that job.
No.
A lot of people, particularly those that are studying at the moment, would know that with uni assignments they often ask for big margins and double spacing. That's because it's easier to read. So I don't necessarily advocate huge margins and double spacing, but you have to think about the reader. Not 8 points, I would say, or 6 points. I would say 11 or 12 points is best. It's easy for the reader to read.
Yes.
And if you go up to 14 points, it looks like you don't have very much to say. So there's a tricky balancing act there between what sort of font you use. Manipulate, as I said before. Don't use too much poetic license, but manipulate your experience to fit the selection criteria.
Yes.
For example, if it says web design experience is the #1 selection criteria, and you have some web design experience but list it further down in your career profile or your career overview or summary, put it up the list.
Yes.
Make it #1.
Yes.
And and use words that the recruiter might be looking for.
That's the engaging part, Pauline?
Yes. So they might say something like experience in preparing HR metrics, and you've done this, but you call it regular reporting preparation for board or executives. So have a look at what your experience is and see whether or not it matches what the key selection criteria is, and if that is the case, then change it so that the wording that the recruiter is looking for is obvious on the page.
Yes, because all what we're trying to do is make it easy in that 15 to 30 seconds to get in the, yes, we'll consider this resume pile. That's what we're trying to do, aren't we?
Yes.
At least initially.
Sometimes I recommend people bold the key selection criteria wording when they use it in their resume, but be very sparing with that because it can look, again, hard to read if you use it to, yes.
So it's about having that and probably just testing and getting some feedback from different folk, isn't it?
Yes.
We've had lots of questions in the pre-webinar registration process about attention grabbing and being memorable and things like that. We're really interested in your thoughts about that, please, Pauline.
There's a number of things that you can do that makes it attention grabbing. As I said before, maybe bold the words. Make sure you get straight to the point. Relate your experience to factual information that can be validated. For example, you could say something like excellent communication skills, but that says much less than saying something like excellent written and verbal communication skills acquired via study and customer service work.
Yes.
So that's a much better valid, factual explanation of your excellent communication skills.
Yes.
A lot of people ask whether or not you should put aspirational stuff in your resume. If you're applying for a mid-level role that requires experience, it can be a detriment to put in your career aspiration, because the employer might look at it and think, oh, you're not going to stay around for very long, so we won't consider you for this role.
Yes.
However, if you're a student coming out of university with not very much work experience, then I would recommend that you do put in something about your career aspirations, because the employer would want to know what you want to do with your career and whether or not that fits with what they wanted you to do for them.
Because a lot of graduate roles are about finding talent and then feeding that into various aspects of the organisation, if the organisation is large enough. And some smaller organisations, I was with a small organisation just last week. They've got 125 people around Australia in what they do. They're called First Contact, and they provide concierge services to buildings around the country. They're quite a fast-growing organisation, but they recognise that for a lot of their folk, they're going to have them for 18 to 24 months, and they're more than happy for people to be coming in as sort of into graduate roles and moving through. So they're quite happy for people to be showing some aspiration, as you've said, but early in their career. So aspirational is specific to where you might be in your career. The standout
That's
point.
right, yes.
The standout point. Just any other. We've talked about bolding, we've talked about addressing the key selection criteria, we've talked about validating what you say in very succinct sentences. Is there anything else that folk can do to stand out, and maybe what they definitely shouldn't do? And we've heard about headings, other things that that might make them stand out. For example, I recently, when I told a friend who works in recruiting about this interview, she said to me, she'd seen someone in the margin around each page of their resume have listed all of the 10 employability skills and what they'd done for those employability skills. It was like they were trying to use the real estate of the page to squeeze as much information as they could, but it looked too over the top, so it ended up in the too hard basket.
Standout, standout is hard. I'll talk a bit more about the way you present your resume later on in this webinar, sometimes the standout might be the calibre of the referees that you choose. If you list them in your resume, and a lot of people do, and some people don't too, but if you list them in your resume, that can be standout. If you've got experience with one of the best recruiters, for example, in the industry, and you're applying for a recruiter role, and they're your referee, that can be an absolute standout from the rest. But yeah, it's hard to know because, well, recruiters are all different as well, and they might be looking for slightly different things. So it's tricky. I might just mention the misleading stuff. Recruiters are getting more savvy with unsubstantiated claims in resumes, and I've seen in my experience people who have been misleading with claiming false qualifications, and organisations are being much more careful about validating these. They might ask you to bring in the original documents when you sign on with them, and there's also companies out there now that do validation of qualifications and references for people. With referee checks, I will often ignore the mobile number that's been provided by the candidate and ring through the switchboard of the company where the referee is supposed to be working, and it's amazing how many of them are no longer working where they're claimed to be working, and sometimes we find that the referees are somebody's mate rather than the person that you would like to talk to about their skills and experience. So be very careful about who you select for your referees, and be very careful that everything that you put in your resume is verifiable and
And
valid.
just from a personal branding point of view, if you discovered that someone was effectively outright lying like that, then that's probably not going to enhance their opportunities in future application processes. They effectively would find themselves black banned, I suspect. So that's quite silly behaviour, really. And really, I think the point, and I've found this at times, I've been listed as a referee without my personal knowledge or approval. And I've been called up and someone wants to ask me some questions about so-and-so, and I'm brutally honest. I say, look, I'm sorry, I haven't approved to be a referee for this person, and I'm very surprised I've got this call. Now, making sure that your referees are current and that they are, their details are current and those sorts of things are absolutely critical. Any other specific recommendations that you'd like to make? Because I am aware of, conscious of time that as we're going through here, Pauline.
Yes. We've already talked about the resume versus the curriculum vitae, and sometimes in an application you might be asked for a statement addressing the selection criteria. If you are asked for that, keep this to one page. Don't go over that, again, because the recruiters may be reading hundreds of these.
Yes.
Sometimes there might be a cover letter requirement as well, and in those cover letters I would say that you really need to address why you want to work for that firm or organisation. You don't, again, want the cover letter saying cover letter for any job, as I did encounter when I was reading those 80 applications a couple of weeks ago. A few people contemplate whether or not they should have a photograph on their resume.
Yes.
I'm in two minds about this. If it's a potentially customer service role or a role where they think the way in which they look may enhance their application, it may be something that's that you do, but it's illegal to, under Victorian law anyway, to choose someone on the basis of how they look.
Yes.
And sometimes it may actually put off a recruiter because not all recruiters are as ethical as we would like them to be. So it's up to you as to whether or not you include a photograph. But just be aware too that I know a lot of people don't put a photo on Facebook because of potential privacy concerns. So you need to be aware of people's biases and have a think carefully about whether you want to put a photograph on.
So I'm hearing with that one probably err on the side of not, unless you're definitely confident it's going to be useful. And just the other thing, you briefly touched on cover letters. I've just got a quick question about that, and that is the context of who the cover letter is about. And the reason why I ask this question, I've seen lots of cover letters where the cover letter is all about the person and what they're going to get out of this job.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on the focus of the cover letter?
Well, when you're recruiting, a company is recruiting for somebody to meet their needs.
Yes.
Not the applicant's needs. So in your cover letter, you really need to state very clearly how you meet their needs, the needs of the company that you're applying to. But they would often be interested, if you achieve that hurdle, in understanding what motivates you to apply for the role. And I have seen cover letters that say things like, well, I want to work close to home, and I want, and those aren't going to get you the interview. It's how you can meet the needs of the organisation that need to go first in the cover letter, and then a little bit about how it meets your needs as well.
Yes. So if we look at what to do now, we've got a bit of a quick recap, which has got some specific details that folk might find very useful, Pauline.
Yep. So take charge, review your resume, make sure that you get somebody else to read it, because we have blind spots, and even the best communicators can put in typos and spelling errors. Manipulate your resume for each role that you're going for. Always have it ready to go, and I suggest that people should revise it at least twice a year. 3 to 4 pages maximum in 11 or 12 font. I have a cover page which just says my name and contact details in detail, but then I would also put my name and my phone number in the footer of every page, because you don't want those pages to get lost or mixed up with other people's resumes, and you need to make sure that your information is clear and at the fingertips of the recruiter. I wouldn't put in tables and flush your information to the left, not to the right. It's very hard to read if you flush it to the right. Bold only, don't put in underlines and bold, that's overkill. And I've had a couple of resumes where I've read people have put in different types of dot points for each section of their resume. It's very off-putting.
Yes.
You choose one type of dot points and use that throughout the resume. In terms of the content, ditch the fun email address. hotsusie at Hotmail or evil pixie is not a good look on a professional email. Get it, and I've had those two. I've actually had, so
yes.
They're real life experience. It doesn't look very professional, so get a Gmail or a Yahoo address if you need a professional sounding address.
Yes.
Some of your personal details may or may not be relevant. If you're going for an international assignment, you might want to put in your marital status, because that might be a consideration in terms of relocation. Your age at the start or the finish of your career may not be an advantage, but some people will require that and ask potentially at interview. Many recruiters advise against putting your age in your resume, and it's not legally required, but you need to make a judgment about whether or not it would be something that is impacting on the role that they're recruiting for. I would recommend a career summary or profile where you list your key strengths. Again, shape it up for the role that you're applying for. But remember, if it gets to be more than 4 to 6 strengths, then the person will stop reading.
Right, right. And position that where in the resume?
I usually put it at the front,
yes.
right at the outset. And if somebody's reading your resume for 15 to 30 seconds, and they don't see any of the words in that summary that are in the key selection criteria, then they're going to ditch your resume
Okay.
there, and then make sure that that reflects what's in the key selection criteria.
Gets back to crafting, as we've mentioned.
Yes, yes. In terms of recapping the content, when you're listing your professional history, put in your job title, the employer. Put in details of the employer if it's a small company and unlikely to be known. Put in the dates, what you did and for whom. It's not a position description, and we often see a cut and paste of
yes.
position descriptions in resumes. Don't do that. Put into 3 to 5 key responsibilities you had in that role, and if you have some achievements, again, 3 to 5 key ones for that role. And you put your last employment first in your list, in your resume.
Yes, and it's amazing how many people get that bit wrong. The last point we've got here about the content, so plugging resume gaps, things like that.
Yeah, if your career is more than 10 years in length, your audit experiences should just be summarised to 1 or 2 lines, and those career gaps are really important to plug. If you haven't if you've taken some time off to raise a family, or if you've travelled overseas for a while, please put that in, because a recruiter might think that a gap in your resume might be because you've been in jail. So be very careful to make sure that all of your resume gaps are filled.
Yes. So in other words, if you have had time out of the workforce because you were working at home, a home manager, then that's fine. You put in home manager and you be explicit about the dates that you were doing that. That's what you're suggesting, absolutely. Or if you took a gap year and you went travelling for a year, particularly if you just graduated from university, you would put in gap year and went travelling and maybe list briefly what the countries were that you visited. Is the sort of advice that you're providing there. Professional memberships?
Yes, put those in. Include the length of the membership and any active role you may have taken in the association. That's very important. That shows whether or not you're a go-getter, which an employer might be interested in. As I said earlier, cultivate your referees. A lot of people don't realise when they leave an organisation that the people that they're leaving behind can be critical to their next career step. So make sure that you have some good referees from each of the organisations that you worked at. And as I said earlier, you can put those list those referees in your resume, or you can put at the end of your resume referees available on request.
Just
and
on that.
Sometimes people do.
Sorry, you finish your sentence. Sorry, Pauline.
Oh, I was just going to say, some people do this to avoid contact with them before an interview. So
yes,
some recruiters will go out and check your referees before they make you an offer of an interview, and your referees, as you said before, might not know that you've even gone for a role. So
yes,
people often put referees available on request rather than listing those referees.
yes. Just on the topic of, and I have had this question multiple times come through, what if part of the reason why you've left or leaving the current organisation is because of a poor relationship with the person that you report to? Now, clearly they're not therefore going to be a referee for you. What advice have you got in that situation, which sometimes can just be a legitimate situation that folk face?
Absolutely, absolutely. That means that the calibre of the referees that you have from previous employers is even more important, or a colleague or a more senior person in the organisation who knows a bit about your work but wasn't a direct supervisor needs to be cultivated as a referee.
What about someone in your industry that you may have known over a long period of time due to working in the same industry, and would they be valid referees as well?
Not so much, because your new employer will be wanting to know about your day-to-day work performance, and they probably wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Okay, fair enough. Hobbies and interests?
Well, for some roles that's really important. I know in the real estate industry, golf membership is something that's quite highly regarded. So if you had that as a hobby or an interest, that might be something that is valid to put in, depending on the role that you're applying for. It depends. If you want to be a member of a quirky team and you have a quirky hobby that they all share, then that might go in your favour. But it can also put people off. So beware of putting people off by putting in that, some of your more outrageous sort of hobbies. And often it's a really good icebreaker in an interview for people to be able to ask you what your hobbies or interests are. So so if you don't put it in your resume, then prepare it for a potential interview.
Now, Pauline, we've got to the section where we've got probably an opportunity for one or two questions from the audience. We do have one hand raised, so I just, looks like that one's gone there. Paul, I just saw that you had your hand raised, but I'll just check your microphone again if you wanted to ask a question. Paul, you're live. Are you right to ask a question, Paul? Okay, Paul's typing his question in there. Okay, no question there? All right, cool. All right, just checking it. When addressing, we've got a question from Wendy here, Paul. It says, when addressing the key selection criteria in a separate document to your resume, should you also use dot points rather than paragraphs?
It depends how many selection criteria are required. If you've got a large number of key selection criteria to address, then most certainly dot points. I'd like to try and see that whole document restricted to a page. So if there's only 5 key selection criteria, then maybe you could use prose, but if there's a lot of key selection criteria, then you're going to have to resort to dot points to fit it into a page.
Yes, okay. So again, you need to be conscious of making it specific to this application process and how much information you've got and whether or not, as you say, it's appropriate to use the dot points or not. We've got a question here from Frank. So Frank, I'll just test your microphone. Hello, Frank. Hello, Frank. It looks like your microphone might not be working. If you've got a chance to type your question in, Frank, we might have a chance to answer that. Looks like we haven't got any other specific questions. I'll just see if Frank's question comes through, or it may have already been answered. Looks like we're looking good at the moment there. So we'll answer that if that comes through. Pauline, that has just been absolutely fantastic in terms of the detail that you've been able to share with the audience, which is extremely appreciated. I really do appreciate you coming on and providing us with your expertise in this space, because your years and years of experience and the many thousands of resumes that you've seen, no doubt. And I think this is really important too, is the employer's perspective, because we often see and read a lot from a recruiter's perspective in terms of recruiting agency type recruiters, but that's not necessarily the same as from an employer's perspective. We do have a question from Frank, and it's relating to transferable or employability skills, and how do you see these, Pauline, and where do they fit in?
That's a good question, Frank. Again, it's crafting your experience to fit if you think that the experience that you have fits the key selection criteria for the role that you're applying for, you need to craft that experience so that the skills that are relevant to that experience can be applied to the role you're applying for. And that's your job. It's not for the recruiter to try and ascertain from your experience whether or not you would have those transferable skills. You have to make the very clear association between I've had this experience and I believe for these reasons that experience applies to this role.
Okay, thank you. Along similar lines, we've got a question from Paul that says, I've seen resumes where the person appears intelligent and interesting and much better than people who might match the key selection criteria. Would you potentially interview those folks? So they appear intelligent and interesting, but they might not have addressed the key selection criteria like other folk.
It depends what you're looking for. A recruiter will, as well as having their key selection criteria that they're looking for the role, have some team fit issues that they're considering as well. And if an intelligent and interesting person is going to be a better team fit than someone that's got the experience and skills, because experience and skills can be learnt, then they might interview that person because of the potential for the team fit. But it depends very much on what the other considerations are that the recruiter's looking for.
And we've got one final question from Sharon.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. To me it does. I hope it does to Paul, who asked that question. And we've got a question here from Sharon. So this will be the last one, folks, for the sake of time. It says, what about contractors who may want to move to an employment role? So someone that's been a contractor and then wants to move into being an employee. Sharon says that referees may not be available or not able to talk about day-to-day work. What do you recommend in that context? So being a contractor, I suspect that Sharon means people that work across different organisations on projects, so to speak, but then would but not be at the same place all the time. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm sure that a lot of contractors actually do get offered permanent roles in the organisations that they're working in. So they would have people from those organisations that know their work, and that's the reason why we offer contractors all the time roles when they come along, because we know their work, we know their capability, and so they often go into permanent roles in the organisations that they've worked in as a contractor.
Yes.
But there would be people in those organisations that would be able to comment on their work, or the recruiter that places them in those contract roles might be able to then act as a referee because of the feedback that they've got about them from their contract assignments.
So I'm really hearing you say don't automatically disregard the folk that you've been working for as a contractor as potential referees, and certainly also the recruitment agency folk might also be able to perform that function. So there's a couple of options there for you,
Yes.
Sharon. And once again, folks,
Yes.
I can hear the clapping. Can anyone else hear that? Can anyone else hear that? I can hear the clapping in the background. I should have a button for clapping to thank you for your time, Pauline. And your specificity of answers has just been a delight. And folks, this has been recorded, so I know that Pauline has shared a huge amount of information for you. So again, if you want to be able to access that recording, please make sure you join us at otmacademy.com. Just a little bit of information too about some other things that I do. Some of you would be aware, but not all of you would be aware, that I do a lot of work in planning for personal success. One of the aspects for folk and their careers is that too often, from my experience, people do career planning that is separate to the rest of their life. And as we can see through this illustration, we do actually have Jock McNeish online who did this illustration for me, and Jock is from Strategic Images and an absolute delight to work with, and in fact one of my personal mentors. And I have an online planning, life planning program for personal success and for planning for life balance, of which a career obviously plays a huge part in that. And if you go to www.planforpersonalsuccess.com, you can see some information about that platform. One of the things about the Yes for Success system, which is what it's called, it enables you to go through a 10-module process to develop your very clear plan for life balance and personal success. And it also has an ongoing platform within that community where members are sharing what they're doing, and also you have direct access to myself. I have a lot of experience in having facilitated the face-to-face version of this program now to over 5,800 people, where I can help guide you through your planning part of that program, but also part of your execution of your plan. And membership for that community is for a 24-month period, which is also something a little bit different. You have my contact details on the screen, so please feel free to get in contact. And again, you have the otmacademy.com to contact to be able to get the recording of the webinar. I would really like to again thank Pauline for her time. It's been a delight to work with you today, Pauline. Any final comments that you'd like to quickly share with folk?
No, it's been a pleasure sharing that information, Gary, and I hope it's been of some use to your participants. Thank you.
No doubt.